you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of On the Line. Guys, I'm going to sit down with Connie. We're going to discuss workplace harassment. I think this may be a bit longer than usual, 7 to 8 minutes, but there's a little bit to discuss here that we want to make sure we get out. It's a quick roundabout discussion. I'm going to try to have a longer dialogue with Connie later in the week. We'll probably post it up on the Tier Talk channel, but I do want to give you the nuts and bolts here, which really matter here, because I want to make sure that you're protected. And this dialogue is actually going to be both for the front line, but also for the supervisors who may find themselves dealing with what could be a EED concern, which is equal employment. Now, real quick, I'm going to have Connie, as I said, with me, and we're going to be discussing concerns where people feel that they're not being treated fairly because of certain protective categories like race, religion, gender, sexual orientation, the list goes on, disability, whatever it is. And we're going to talk about what happens if it's happening to you, what you need to do, or if you're a supervisor and you are getting the complaint, how you can protect yourself. Because sometimes, guys, even though there's a violation, sometimes, or a perceived violation, sometimes these are personality conflicts, and we have to be careful how much we get involved in that and how much we should forward out to the proper authorities, because personality conflicts could take down a whole ship. Trust and believe that. I'm sure we all agree with that. Connie, the author of The Cage Was Her Cocoon, I am honored at this point that you were able to sit down with me, this famous author. You know, I love you, Connie. Your book's amazing, guys. If you get a chance, Connie's got her books. They're coming out. Well, the pre-purchase are now, but they'll be coming out October 30th, 2020. So if you watch this before or after, before you can pre-purchase, after you can purchase. But Connie, you mind introducing yourself to our audience again?
Hi, everyone. Connie Alleyne here. I am the founder and president of the Civilian Corrections Academy. I'm also the podcast host of The Fly Behind the Wall, and now the author of The Cage Was Her Cocoon. I am excited to talk about this because having stepped in corrections at a pretty young age, I've had my share of situations, to say the least.
Hey, you know what's funny? Age is a protective category. Yep. You know, you guys want to hear something funny? If a rookie decides to put a complaint on you and they can show that you're messing with them only because they're rookies, that could be an equal employment complaint. So again, it's very, gotta be very careful. We gotta protect ourselves because you never know. So one thing is right now is we're talking about protective categories, right? So there is a list of what those protective categories can be. We name a few, but having said that, the reason why they're protected is because they are the rights of those individuals. And the last thing we want to do as an agency, or even as an individual who may oversee them or be connected to them in the workplace, maybe a peer, is to violate those rights in any way, because agencies will have zero tolerance towards that. You're talking about, this is not progressive discipline here, guys. This is, if you cross that line, you can easily be removed. Now, mind you, sometimes if you both are battling against each other, they may be a little bit more forgiving because there's heated arguments and you guys are going back and forth, but there's a third party out there that gets offended. Both could be gone. You know, so again, this is a very important conversation because this is an effort to keep your job, and as a supervisor, also to keep your job. Now, Connie, we touched on this video before a little bit, but we talked about, just briefly, guys, we have a lot to cover here. I'm trying to break it down. Is we talked about people that are dealing with that complaint, that put that complaint through. But I also want to talk about people that hear something that they don't like. So a third person involved in the complaint, not because they're the ones saying anything, but maybe that they're in the vicinity of hearing it. Now, with that said, if you're a peer, what would you recommend them to do if they heard something inappropriate? And if you're a supervisor, what should they do? Gave you a hint, Connie. I gave you a hint.
Listen, as a supervisor, you have no choice but to deal with it. It's not an option for you to ignore it and pretend that it didn't happen because you were there. Now, for the third party person who might have been, you know, a witness to this, absolutely, they can come forward and, you know, give their paperwork, file their report, document. And the moment they bring it forward, the supervisor is obligated to move it forward, and they're obligated to protect the person who actually brought it forward. Whether or not they agree it's neither here nor there. It is not something that's subjective. Quite frankly, when we are talking about protected classes, or we're talking about, things where there are true legal ramifications, supervisors do not have a choice.
Right, and that's what you exactly meant when it says deal with it. It means that in most guidelines, if you are a supervisor, it's going to be you must, as opposed to if you're a peer, it's strongly recommended. So again, so let's say me and Connie are having an argument, and there's a third person listening to it. If I say something wrong or she says something wrong, and it's a peer that hears it, then the peer would be recommended, hey, you should report it, but you can't force it onto the peer. They could or they can't. They could be used later as a witness, but it can't be held against them because they didn't report it because it's highly recommended. At least that's for some workplaces. I believe, I don't know if that carries out in all workplaces, but in some workplaces it's there. But if you're in a position if you're in a supervisory position, it's totally different. You oversee. So at that point, what you're going to do is immediately stop that dialogue and tell each person to write a report. And then you're going to take that report to the higher level. What you're not going to do as a supervisor is try to solve the issue. No. You're doing it by having them write the reports and then forward it over to the liaison, who will probably call those individuals down and then go ahead and give them packets so they can write their concerns down. And then it probably goes up to another level who will investigate the matter. But again, it's an effort to be objective. So you kind of want to get it out of the area of the facility and bring it up to the highest level you can, so they can treat it more fair and objective. So it can also be seen that way. So again, if you're a supervisor, it's a must. Protect your job. There's a concern, report it immediately by taking it up the chain. Have those people write reports. Do what you got to do with your peer. You should do the right thing, but you probably can't be forced to. But again, that's not 100% everywhere. But for the most part, for the supervisor, automatically. I think that should be pretty much universal. I think if you're a supervisor, that's your position. But again, you don't get involved. You just vote, stop, write a report. You take them confidential, and then you forward it up the chain of command. You can actually forward it right up to the liaison. You don't necessarily have to go to your immediate next level of authority. You can probably go to liaison because you do want to protect the integrity of the complaint by, obviously protecting. You don't want to go through every hand, if you will. Now, real quick, and this is kind of where the discussion will be, is so let's say Connie comes up to me and I'm going to play the supervisor role. And the reason why I'm going to play the supervisor role is because that's when it's mandated for us to do the right thing. So if Connie had a concern about one of her peers and she went to her peer doesn't have to report it. As I said, for the most part, again, I don't know if your agency is different, but for most agencies, they won't have to report it. But now if Connie goes to the supervisor, for the supervisor, just to tell you this right now, there's no between me and you on this. You know what I mean? It's Mr. Gangi, or let's say, Sergeant, Sarge, I had this concern with such and such. Can I talk to you off the record? Nope. Whatever the concern is, be advised. If I feel that it touches onto one of these concerns, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the dialogue right there. Again, have you write a report, and I will personally get it delivered to the EED liaison so that matter could be handled at the higher level. Now, if that person chooses to continue the dialogue, that's great. If they choose not to have the dialogue, it's okay. I offered the thing. I can't force you to tell me what it is. So go ahead and you can step off. At the end, I'm offering you a route to take. Now, when the employee decides to have that route from the employee's perspective, and I'll cross into Connie with this one, it's very important that she documents or he documents, correct? Now, before Connie talks about the importance of documentation, remember, guys, we're talking about protective categories, things that can never be used against you to treat you in an unfair or biased manner. So again, we touched on a few, right? Sex, sexual orientation or gender, race, religion, disability, whatever the concern may be. But Connie, let's talk about the importance of documentation. Why should we document that interaction?
So I think what we want to make sure that we do is that we are protecting ourselves. And so because we know that harassment is repetitive in nature, it's knowing that this is not going to stop until someone actually steps in and stops it. So for example, I had an employee who was pregnant, and she felt she was being treated unfairly because she was pregnant. Like they wanted her to go out on medical leave and she wanted to work until the end. And so that in of itself, she had rights like to maintain her employment and such. And like I think different agencies handle pregnancy different. If there's ways for, you know, women who are pregnant who are still working to be safe in the environment still, that sometimes there are posts where they can be put and other times there aren't posts where they could be put. But you can't mistreat someone because they're pregnant and you want them to now stop working. You know, it's just, I had received, you know, complaints from staff that, you know, they felt that, you know, a particular person was being mistreated because they were Asian and we didn't have many Asian nurses, right? Which I was like, wow, okay. So for me, it's just give me the information because it's not my role to try to fix it, right? And if in fact that person went to their peer and said, hey, listen, you know, I think this is going on, you know, I think they're treating me this way because of this, right? And whatever that this is, as long as you feel that that is happening, it is your obligation to bring that forward, to write it. And we don't know which direction it's going to go. You know, it's going to go through a review process, but at least you create a record and a history of this is happening, because legally, this is how you have the support to, I guess, protect yourself.
Right. And you said something key that I don't want to overlook, and definitely we could, I'm taking mental notes right now. It has to be related to that protected category. And guys, be honest, don't make it up. If you're having a personality conflict with somebody, don't make it up like it's because of our race or my sex, my gender. I mean, you know, sometimes people do have personality conflicts that may only last a moment, but now you're going to write a report that could last forever. That could mess up this person's chance to be investigated because you guys just don't get along, and then you want to interpret what they're saying. And I'll be honest with you guys, it has to be evident. You know, so if you're coming up with a complaint that relates to that protective category, it's your job to prove that this complaint relates to that protective category. It's not up for the investigators to, you know, try to interpret that. You know, even though, don't get me wrong, sometimes it's implied and we don't know. But for the most part, it's your job to really list the facts. This is what happened. Now, the EED liaison is probably the only person in the facility, if you do have one, that can give you guidance. And it's very important that I tell you guidance, because you could still do what it is that you feel you need to do. But you don't even have to tell them what that concern is. Let's say for some reason you don't trust the liaison, that's fine. You can go outside the department. There's offices all over the place. You could go outside the department. But if you have a good rapport with the liaison, they are in the most trusted position. And guys, trust me, if they violate the integrity of your complaint, their job is done. You have their job is done. This is no joke right now. This is zero tolerance. So, and again, the agency's job is to protect themselves by protecting the individuals who could be treated unfairly. But when you go to the ED liaison can ask you if they want, would you like to tell me what the concern is? But look at the key. Would you like to tell me? I'm not forcing you to tell me, you know, because you could just send me a confidential envelope after I give you a packet. You know what I mean? You could send it back confidentially and I just forward it out. I've never seen it. But for most times, sometimes they'll talk to the liaison. You could discuss what the concerns are, and the liaison may give you some advice. It's in their ability to do so. But at the end, you ultimately decide what you want to do with it. If you're going to ask for, let's say, my advice as liaison, that's great. I'll give you all the advice, but it's only advice. You make the interpretation, because we're not perfect either. But sometimes we may see something that's obviously not an EED complaint. And we may suggest it to you that, well, you know what? You could do what you want, but at this point, this seems to be, it's more of a personality conflict, or it's more of, you know, maybe some issue that could be operational. You know, maybe we could settle it by talking to the majors. But having said that, you decide what you would like to do, because you have to realize something too. Anytime that there's a personality conflict, we're trained on universal precaution. Whoop, forward that up. And then we wait for someone at a high authority to say, listen, this is not an EED matter. Bring it back and address it operationally. Because sometimes you're going to have that. That's where you're going to have the EED and operations working together, right? But sometimes the best thing is for it to be passed back down, because it could touch on something. I don't know. Let me pass it up. And if they say this is not an EED concern, then we'll address it operationally. But it should never be ignored. And when we address something operationally, when they give it back to us to address it, that's when we may have to bring the parties down, because we do have to address it. EED would probably do it a little differently, especially if there's a violation. They'll interview everybody as they come along to protect the integrity of the investigation, but they also have to promise that during this investigation that you cannot be retaliated against for saying what needs to be said, especially if it's going against the agency or, supervisors, whatever it is. But at the end, just want to tell you guys that we have to make an effort to protect the person making the complaint, as well as protect the person that's receiving the complaint. That people forget about that, but that's true. Connie, what's your thoughts when I say that about protecting the person that receives the complaint?
So I think it really matters in that we are in a very tense time, I think, as a nation. And so when you think about race, for example, I think there's a certain awareness that we have to have as it relates to EED and harassment, so that we're not kind of on a slippery slope, right? And so because we are in this environment where we're like family, right? And so it is very easy for the person who makes the complaint, as well as the person receiving the complaint, to have almost like, I don't want to say a gang mentality, but people do take sides. And so it matters that all of my colleagues aren't going to turn their back on me, or it matters that all of the other person's colleagues aren't going to be on attack, right? So I think because we need to think about both sides and the impact that the complaints could have either way, we do have to make sure that they're both protected.
Right. And just before we come to a close, because again, we'll have a bigger discussion too on the Tier Talk channel, the importance of documentation. Please document the concern. If you're a supervisor, do the right thing with that documentation. If you're reporting it, document the people that you reported it to, so it forces them to do something. We don't want to put, well, I spoke to management. Who? Because that motivates the person to do the right thing. I think later on we'll cross into ethic concerns as well. I think that's a dialogue that we could touch on later on. But I really want to focus on the EED complaints because we do see it a lot. And I want to make sure that, one, we take the right efforts to protect ourselves by making sure it's properly documented. So if there are incidences, we're properly reporting it. But also if you're supervisor, what do you have to do with those complaints? And be careful of your involvement, because sometimes even an effort to do the right thing, you will wind up getting in trouble. Which includes, well, you know what? These two employees, I'll just separate them. Ooh. Unless there's a hostile part of that, you won't. And that's a discussion we can definitely have too. But all right, guys, I kind of like say anything in closing.
I would just like to say, listen, document always. Like that is, if it is not written, it did not happen. And so whether it's going to go somewhere or it's not going to go somewhere, you want to make sure that you're protecting yourself and that you have put the ownership where it needs to be. Your supervisor is only going to do what you give them the guidance to do. So once you bring forward a complaint, they are going to do their best to, it's like that hot potato. In this situation, this is not something anybody wants to hold on to.
Right. And well said, Connie, by the way. Hey, guys, if you get a chance, don't forget, check out Connie's book, The Cages Are Cocoon. Great book, great read, depending on when you're seeing this. Actually, you know what? The show usually come out Friday, so either way, her book will be released by then, October 30th, 2020. Congratulations, Connie. It's such a great milestone in your life. What a great book. And I'll tell you something, the best part of that book is that beautiful woman on the cover. It's that beautiful woman on the cover. She's my Oprah. So, all right, guys. As always, guys, stay safe, and I'll see you guys next week.